Welcome to The Strategic Leader, the podcast for people-focused leaders who want to think, act and feel more strategic. I'm Gemma Bullivant.
And I'm Fee Craig. In this series, we're tackling the big, hairy questions shaping the world of work and exploring how to respond with strategic clarity, not just strong opinions.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Strategic Leader podcast with me, Gemma Bullivant.
And with me, Fee Craig.
Great to have you with us and joining us on this, our series 4 of the podcast. We're going to be exploring some big, hairy strategic questions in this particular series. So to position that, I think, this episode is really going to be focusing on how we can explore and how we can shift our personal opinion through to a more strategic viewpoint. And this is really useful when we've got big, tricky, strategic questions or challenges to tackle. So we'll explain a little bit more about that. But yeah, we're here and we're all about big, hairy, strategic questions, right, Fee?
Well, I'm not sure I like the sound of big, hairy, strategic questions. I mean, some of you might be familiar with the terminology big, hairy, audacious goals, big BHAGs. We're not talking about goals, but we just like the language. They're big, bold topics, like, for example, what on earth do we do about remote or hybrid working? Or what on earth do we do about performance ratings? Are they any good or not? So there's some of these big questions, and people tend to have quite entrenched and firmly held views on these big questions, regardless of whether they actually really know what they're talking about. And I totally include myself in that. And I'm going to do you the disservice of including you in that too, Jem, because I think it's a really human thing. Sometimes on those big topics, we find that we have an opinion. We sometimes don't consider where on earth that opinion has come from. It can be emotive. It can be built on our assumptions or our own personal experience. And then we come to the table with a kind of, well, I think A, and you may very well come across a situation where somebody else comes to the same table going, well, I think B. And then somebody else comes along, well, I think C. And like, what on earth are you going to do with all that? I see it all the time. I definitely have been part of it, although I like to think I'm trying to be more aware about it. But, we do it, don't we, right? If we have a big topic to talk about, we can come to it with a firmly held view that's not necessarily based on something. I'm going to call out, for this conversation, we're going to call that your opinion. And we're trying to shift, as you say, we're trying to shift to a more strategic viewpoint, which is more helpful in the professional context. It's more rational in the professional context. It's easier to work with when you're working with other people. And it sets a great role modeling example for other people. But I guess the question is, how do we get there? I suppose the other thing that we should also say at this point is that sometimes when we have big, hairy, audacious questions, it's also possible to not have an opinion, to not have a viewpoint, to look at that question and go, gosh, do you know, I've never really thought about it. I don't have a clue. And what we're also trying to do here is show you how to get to a strategic viewpoint. So the methodology is kind of the same, regardless of whether you come to the table thinking you know the answer, or whether you come to the table thinking, do you know what, I actually haven't got a clue what I think about this yet. I haven't really thought about it.
Yeah, so we're really going to be exploring how to think about these topics, not necessarily what we think about these topics. I'm sure we will lob in our own personal views.
I'm sure we will.
And, for some that may be quite helpful as well, just to hear different views. But what we're really focusing on here, as you've rightly said, is demonstrating some of the strategic thinking, flexing some of those strategic thinking muscles to help us to arrive at some different perspectives around these really challenging topics that we're going to tackle in this series. And so we're not necessarily here to be right, not necessarily here to provide the right answer.
There's a real human desire to be right, isn't there? We all kind of really want to be right. But I think I think what you're saying, we're not here to be right, we're here to be strategic, is a really important thing to ponder on. We're here to be useful. We're here to move this forward. And if that might involve being wrong. along the way.
Absolutely. It might well involve being wrong, and it will definitely, the right answer, I would say, in 99% of cases, will rely on the situation, the set of circumstances, the context in which the question that we're tackling is is present. So I'm often asked for, what's the best bonus scheme, or what's the best reward strategy, or how much should we pay people? And it really depends on such a wide range of factors that we actually don't have a right answer to that. There isn't one off the shelf
Yeah.
bonus scheme that applies to everyone. It's the gold standard and nothing else, everything else is secondary. The gold standard bonus scheme, to take that example, is gold standard because it delivers what your business needs it to deliver. And so that's where that context comes in. So if we extend that idea to the context of whatever it is the topic that we're talking about, there may not be one right answer. The right answer is what's the best answer for you and your particular set of circumstances.
So I can imagine in that example you just given, you've got a bunch of pretty senior people gathering around a table to discuss, the new bonus scheme. Everybody is going to show up, I guess, either with a very firm belief that they've got the right answer, or maybe some people are turning up going, do you know what? I don't have a clue. And the point that we need to put on the table is there isn't a
Yeah,
single right answer necessarily. We need to find the best answer for our specific question.
yeah,
And that means exploring the different viewpoints, the context, and what the organization is really demanding of us in this room at the moment, which is not, here's what I think, but I still think, yeah, but I still think, I really feel that. Those kind of sentence starters that you hear all the time that are not really strategic.
yes. And when we go into these sorts of conversations with these differing viewpoints, with the intention that we need to in some way win the argument or persuade the other person of our view, what we're doing is we're getting sucked into that sort of downward spiral of the detail of the answer.
Yeah.
And what we need to do in some ways is convert that into an upward spiral, if you like,
Yeah.
of understanding the breadth of opinion, understanding the breadth of perspectives that there are in the room. So let's think about some of the ways that we can switch from being in a downward spiral to being in an upward spiral and taking that more strategic balcony to dance floor view. Remember that analogy? The
I
dance
always
floor.
remember that analogy.
Yeah, the dance floor is where it's all going on. That's the detail.
Mhm.
That's in some ways the answer, but it's quite contained within the place on the dance floor that you happen to be on. You don't have full scope of the room. You're just in one place on the dance floor. The balcony is where you are still in the same room, but you're looking at it from a different perspective. So that upward spiral is taking you up onto the balcony to look at it more
Yeah.
broadly.
So that's if we think about ways of shifting our viewpoint from an opinion to a strategic viewpoint, then there's kind of three elements that we're going to bring in, and it will be interesting to see for each topic how we manage to bring these three elements together. And the first
Mm,
one, as you described, balcony, not dance floor, is bringing that sense of perspective. How conscious am I that actually, even though I think I've got the right answer when I'm on the dance floor, when I go up on the balcony, it's possible that I've missed something.
mm,
How aware am I of, oh, I think this is the right answer because maybe that's what I've experienced before, or because maybe that's what I read or listened to on a podcast, or because I tried something else before and it didn't work, and therefore this one
mm.
must be the right answer. So thinking about bringing some perspective to where does my view come from, and understanding why I have the view that I have, recognizing that it is just one perspective. So that
Mm.
sense of perspective is the first of the three things we're going to be bringing in.
Yeah, and just building on that, when I'm now thinking about these conversations that I have, so, in businesses. So let's use the bonus scheme design as an example. In a typical bonus scheme design that I might do for an organization, it would almost always involve conversations with different senior stakeholders, different business leaders that may have a say or need to be influenced, wherever they sit on the RACI model. And What those conversations typically involve is lots of different perspectives. I tend to do it on a one-to-one basis. I sometimes workshop it, but often the one-to-one basis allows a deeper, more connected conversation with that individual where they feel they can be very candid about their view, go into quite a lot of detail that sometimes a workshop can squash a little. I go into that set of conversations fully expecting that what we need to do is explore some different, what is their perspective, but also where does that perspective come from? So, in relation to a bonus scheme, I might get somebody who favors quite a team based approach rather than an individual approach, and another person who might be really, really wedded to the idea that we have to bonus people on their individual performance. Two very different kind of ways of approaching a bonus scheme design. So to build on that perspective that we've talked about is where does that come from for them?
Yeah.
I like to sort of understand a little bit about not just the mechanics of how that works, but actually, in fact, not that at this point in time, but what's that based on? What does that build for them? What does that give them that a different perspective wouldn't? Is it based on the fact that that was what they've seen work well in the past in other organizations? Is it based on some ideology that they have that team is better than individual from a sort of an ideological standpoint? Where does it come from? And in having that conversation with that leader, what it's doing is it's opening their eyes to the perspective that they have, which is a really valuable step forward in strategic discussions.
So I guess that takes us very much to the second part of the model, which is about being aware of and open to the alternatives. And I guess you're exploring, well, what sits behind your preference for this solution? And it might be, like you say, experience, it might be attitude to risk, it might be financial. Drilling down to either any one of those things might open up, well, are there other ways of tackling this with the same attitude to risk? Are there other ways of tackling this, based on your experience? What else could we try? So being open to the idea that there are other alternatives out there. And can I be okay with the fact that even though I do have a preference, can I be open to the idea that other things may also be valid? And what's really critical here in this kind of alternative space is accepting the fact that two or more things can be true at the same time.
Strategic mantra.
Yeah,
This
you
is
love
my
this one, don't
strategic
you?
mantra of 2025. Two things can be true at the same time.
Are we gonna get T-shirts with that printed on? Because
I feel
generally
like
that's true. I mean, it's
yeah.
totally true. Two or more things are likely to be true at the same time. To go back to this point, there's no single right answer. There could be multiple right answers. We just have to
Mm.
choose.
And I think the point here in this sort of second part of this three steps that we're going through is the openness to that idea, and therefore the curiosity that engenders, that I actually want to know the alternatives here. I'm not here to go into that downward spiral of trying to convince the other person of my view. I am here to go into that upward spiral of opening my perspective to other views to help me to either reinforce my own perspective that I have considered alternatives and I don't buy into those for whatever reason, but it just allows you to bring that wider perspective into view and holding that space for conflicting ideas. I think we've just got really bad at doing. I think we've got really bad at, what's the term? Disagreeing agreeably? That's that. The rest is politics do have some
Yeah.
sort of thing on that, don't they? We
Yeah,
we we should be able to disagree agreeably.
yeah, because I mean, what you've said there is the C word, which is conflict, conflicting truths. And the minute you bring the idea of conflict into, into a meeting room, into a conversation, then it's very possible that people are going to get twitchy. Some people love conflict, some people embrace it, some people don't see it as a dirty word. You can change that word to challenge or kind of creative grit. But it's
Mm,
that idea about you can't make a pearl without a bit of grit. And if we
mm,
all thought the same thing all the time, we would be guilty of groupthink, and we'd almost certainly be missing a whole heap of alternatives that are
mm,
likely to be much better than the one that we all agree on. So being able to bring conflicting views or, other alternatives to the table and consider them openly
mm,
and rationally without being too attached to our starting point is an incredible strategic skill and one we all need more of in the workplace. And probably you could argue that the world needs more of that generally at the moment as well, which is, can we consider really, with curiosity, can we really consider opposing views? Can we let
mm,
go of our need to be right? Can I let go of tying my sense of self and sense of identity to being right and say, well,
mm,
actually, I'm my identity, my sense of self comes from being intellectually capable of considering alternative views and
mm.
possibly changing my mind when I have more data. That
Yeah,
would be a great place to get to, wouldn't it? In a meeting, in a conversation, in a difficult
yeah,
topic, and broader as well.
yeah. So we've had perspective and
Mhm,
awareness, that balcony view of things. We've had this alternatives and curiosity to alternatives. The third part of the model here is bringing the attention back to the context or the focus or the problem we're trying to solve. So thinking about what I said earlier about there's no single gold standard bonus design. The Here what we're talking about is the context of the situation. This is actually understanding the different nuances of our own particular set of circumstances and really getting back to the problem that we're trying to solve. It isn't a conversation about how good, bad, or otherwise the particular solution is in isolation of
mhm.
how well that solution might solve the problem that we're tackling.
Absolutely. It's what does the business need, not what do I prefer.
Yeah.
Recently, I've witnessed a group of people discussing some fairly small thing related to their business, and they identified the fact that it might need to change, and then the conversation went A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B, back and forth like a game of tennis. I think this,
Mm,
well, I think that, well, I think this, well, I think that. And it went back and forth. And not once did anybody go, hold on a second. What problem are we actually trying to solve here? What is not working and needs to change? What is
mm,
working and we can keep that bit? What would good look like? What
mm,
is the outcome or the change that we're trying to see? And then let's work backwards to figure out how we can achieve that. It was like a game of tennis with sort of no points. It just sort of went on and on and on. And so that idea about moving away from what do I prefer to hold on a second, what does a business need? What is the change that we need to see? What are our criteria for success here?
yeah.
Um, how does it link to the broader organizational or commercial goals? Is that systemic view, taking a view out, again, bringing perspective in a bit, but what does the organization need? Not what do I prefer?
Yes, absolutely. And I've got a really good example of this where, if I'm thinking about a particular a recent project where there've been different business leaders inputting into the bonus design that I referred to. And everybody in the team, there was a senior leadership team of, I think, 5 or 6, or 5 of the 6 really, really wanted an individual-based scheme, and the 6th person really, really wanted team-based
Hmm.
and was very, very focused on that. Now, we're not going to necessarily change people's ideology. He might hold an ideological belief that team-based approaches are better than individual-based approaches for all sorts of reasons that, we explored during some of the discussions that we had. Where we needed to get to in relation to this particular scheme was, okay, you may hold that view and you may hold that view till the day you die. That's absolutely fine. That's your prerogative. But in the context of this particular scheme, in what we need to achieve as an organization, we have agreed as a leadership team that we need a generic approach. That was one key thing that we agreed. Therefore, he needed to find a way to come to the party and say, "Look, I still prefer team-based, but I can see that an individual approach is going to work in this business context. I might believe that team would work better, but I have no issues with the fact that the individual scheme won't work. I'm not here saying it won't work. I'm just saying I'd rather it worked in this way." And that was really, I mean, you do lots of work with teams to sort of help people converge onto one single way forward based on multiple opinions. And we're not here to sort of unpack that in this episode, but that leans into that a little bit, doesn't it? That idea that at some point you have to have a bit of a release of your own personal preference in the
Yes,
interests of what's best for the organization.
absolutely. I think, that idea about leaders learning to depersonalize their own view and to ladder up to what's best for the business is
Mm,
is a really critical skill. And there is something in there about it, with the very act of exploring the alternatives means that everybody will have a space to put their view forward. So everybody knows they're going to be heard. And there's a lot of evidence that shows that people are much more likely to compromise if they feel that they have been genuinely heard. And this takes us to the notion of disagreeing and committing. So there's a
mm,
kind of ideology called disagree and commit, which means I can disagree with you. My preference would be for something else, but I can still commit to the agreed outcome that, from the group
mm.
because I've been heard. I've had a chance for my view to be really, really listened to. And even though everybody has really, really listened to my view, the group has still decided to go with another option. But I can commit to that because I've been heard in the process. So this idea about exploring the alternatives, exploring the context, being aware of my own perspective and what's generating it will help me commit to whatever the answer is,
Mm,
even if it
mm.
wasn't the one that started with me.
And all of that enables us to move from having an opinion or a perspective to a strategic viewpoint or perspective or opinion, a strategic decision, which is what we started out in this conversation to explore.
Absolutely. So it's good that's what we need to aim for as individuals because it helps to structure our thinking, it helps us depersonalize and take in broader context. It helps us sound more authoritative and more clearer and rational in our thinking when we're talking
Yeah.
about it or when we're writing a presentation about it, to kind of be
Yes.
aware of these things. And it will help you kind of structure conversations if you're facilitating or hosting
Mm.
conversations about it, just having this kind of model in mind. So, to take us back out to our kickoff of season 4. Season 4, I still always call it seasons. I'm still going season rather than series, but it's series 4. We're going to be tackling some big topics. We'd mentioned hybrid. We're talking about pay transparency, how to tackle appraisals, etc. But each episode is going to be as much about how we discuss and debate and explore these topics as about the topics themselves. So we are unlikely to be landing on a single right answer. That's not really what it's for. It's an exploration. But we will hopefully challenge ourselves and our guests to model how we think it through so that you can kind of see our workings in action.
Mm. Fantastic. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to talking to our guests. We always welcome your input, and perhaps maybe you want to be a guest, in which case do drop us a line. And also drop us a line if you've got a big, hairy strategic question or something that you want us to tackle on the podcast, whether or not you're involved in it. That's absolutely fine. Do get in touch.
And in fact, our list of hairy questions for Series 4 has been influenced by some of the questions that have come in from you. So thank you so much to those people who have been in touch and given us questions and ideas for things that we can talk about on the podcast. We really, really appreciate hearing from you.
Fantastic. Well, on that note, we'll close. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Strategic Leader. We'd love it if you could subscribe or maybe share with a colleague or just leave us a quick review.
And if you have a big, hairy question you'd like us to explore, or perhaps a strategic dilemma you're wrestling with, just drop us a line, gemma@gemmabullivant.co.uk.
And remember, having a strategic viewpoint doesn't necessarily mean having all the answers. It's more about asking better questions, broadening your view, and staying curious.
We'll see you next time.